My name is Amanda Williams, and I'm with Jim Zobel today, and we are both historians here at the MacArthur Memorial. And today we're going to be talking about the Oryoku Maru. Now, by 1944, as Americans got closer to the Philippines, the Japanese accelerated their efforts to ship the POWs held in the Philippines to other parts of their empire to serve as forced laborers. The POWs would be packed by the hundreds in the dark holds of transport ships, and they'd have very little food, very little water. Sanitation was very, very poor as well. And so for a lot of these POWs, even after everything they'd already faced, the hell ships represented yet another hellscape for them. Some of the POWs on these hell ships were even driven mad by the conditions, even after everything else they'd already suffered. So today we're going to be talking about one of the most maybe notorious of the hell ships, and that is obviously the Oryoku Maru. Let's get oriented first, though, Jim. What is going on in the POW camps in the Philippines in 1944, and why and where are these POWs being shipped to?
Well, it's like you said, they're moving them all out because the Americans are coming so much closer to them, and they've decided to bring them all back to Japan or Manchuria or Korea. They've got camps in all those three places that they're going to be moving all these former POWs back to Japan. They start moving them out that spring, summer, out of the Philippines. In June of 1944, they start clearing out that camp on Mindanao, which is the southernmost island at the Davao Penal Colony, and they take about 1,100 of those from there to bring them back to Manila. They leave about 750 there that will have their own troubles coming up in September. But just as it's like the 12th health ship journey in the Philippines for those POWs there. And just as, like you said, this is a ship, a freighter, the Shinyo Maru, or not the Shinyo Maru, but the Yashua Maru. They can hold about, 150 people comfortably maybe, and they throw 1,100 people on there. And, limited food, limited water, no bathrooms, anything. And that's just, an idea of what these hell ships are going to be in 1944. So they're trying to get them out of the way. They're moving all the prisoners from Southeast Asia, Singapore, all those people that have finished the Burmese railway, like the British and the Dutch and everybody, and they're moving them all towards Japan, further north. Yeah.
Now, tell us about the Oryoku Maru, though. I mean, she obviously doesn't come into service as a hell ship.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a newer ship compared to most all the other hell ships, which were basically freighters and things like that. There were some bigger ships that they used, but it's about a 7,000 ton, and they called it like an inter-island steamer. And it could take passengers, it could take cargo, and it had been built in about 1937. But by 1944, the Japanese have lost about 40% of their merchant marine fleet to American submarines, to American air power, and so they're using everything. And the Oryoku Maru had been taken over by the Japanese Navy at the beginning of the war and used as like a troop ship, but it's going to be also used as this POW ship. So the captain of this ship is Shin Kajiyama, and he's got to bring on about 500 Japanese civilians, and that's women and children that are leaving the Philippines because everybody's getting out. And then there's all those ships that have been sunk in Manila Bay. So you've got about 1,200 crew as well as passengers from all those ships that have been bombed out. They're going to get on the Oryoku Maru. And then you've got about 1,500 Japanese soldiers as well that are going to get on. And they're all on those upper decks, filling all the 3 decks that are above. But then they're going to also bring those prisoners aboard, and they're going to put them down in the hold. Down there. Now, Kajiyama, who is the captain, he doesn't want those prisoners on there. He violently objects to this, and that's what's going to save him later during the war crimes trials. But General Gao, who runs all the camps in the Philippines, he's there. This is an army order. You're going to take all of them, and you're going to get them on that ship right now.
Why does he not want them? Is he worried about
he knows it's going to be a
war
problem.
Crime, or
no,
he knows many people on it?
Yeah, you've got a ship that can handle maybe 2,000-3,000, and now you've got 4 or 5,000 on there. I mean, it's so overloaded, even though it's a, it's a bigger ship, and he's worried about that because the thing is that the submarines and the air power's going nuts now, and they're worried about getting out, especially since right before the Oryoku Maru, the Arisan Maru had gone and had gotten sunk. By the USS Sharp.
This is right about that time when you look at those charts of like how many tons of Japanese shipping have been sunk. This is like where it just seems to just accelerate.
Well, the Ultra is going to play a lot in that.
Yeah.
The code breaking is going to reveal a lot of these transport.
But they don't
convoys.
know what's on the
Some
transports.
they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably an
Some they
entirely
do.
different conversation
Yes,
for another
it is.
time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So December 13th. 1944, the Oryoku Maru loaded up with these civilians, with these Japanese soldiers, and then these POWs leaves Manila bound for where?
Well, they're going to go to Dacao, Formosa, and that's the usual trip. Is Philippines to Formosa is about 1,200 miles, I think. Then from Formosa, you're going to go to Moji, and Moji is the big port where all POWs go to. It's right down there at the northern tip of Kyushu, I believe, and then go across the Shimonoseki Straits and take them all these POW camps. But so that's going to be the normal route. The thing is on the 13th, after they load everybody, at about 5 o'clock, it's going to go just out into Manila Bay. And they're gonna wait till about 3 a.m. when they get started, because the idea is the submarines they work at night. And the bombers you worry about during the day. And so now there had been a lull ever since November of American air attacks. They first started in September, went pretty heavy through November, but then they stopped, and that's why they shipped these ships out then. So the idea was to get going early morning and avoid the submarines, which operate at night basically, and try to get far enough north up the west coast of Luzon before and get out of the range of that air power, the U.S. Navy air power. And so on the 13th, they pull out and just go right into the Manila Bay, and they're gonna get out the next morning.
And I think you've already mentioned it, but how many POWs are aboard, and are they all Americans, or is it kind of an international set of?
They say that out of all of them, there's about 35 Dutch and British and some Czechs and some other civilians. The thing was in September they started clearing out Cabanatuan, and they pulled a draft of about 1,500 out and sent them down to Bilibid as well. All the men that are at Pasay for Nichols Field, about half the group that are at Palawan, they're pulled out to go to Manila to all gather there. In September, they brought those final guys from Davao, and they're on the Shinyo Maru, which the USS Paddle will sink on September 7th, and out of 750 on there, 675 are going to die. 81 will survive, but they're rescued by American submarines, because the Japanese go and they shoot everybody in the water. That was just that was policy for them. So they'll come back, all get into Manila. And what's goofy about those Palawan guys is they'll miss the massacre there, but they all get put on the Arisan Maru. Like when the October 7th draft comes to take everybody from Cabanatuan, and this is the clearing out of Cabanatuan. There's only 500 people left after that, and that's the people who can't move and the few doctors that are going to take care of them. They all go down to Bilibid, and they find the earlier contingent that had left in September still there because they couldn't get out because of the bombings. In October, they'll take 1,777 of them, and they put those guys on the Arisan Maru. They leave October 24th. They get hit by the shark. 9 guys survive.
Yeah.
And, all those guys that had, gone from Palawan, they're all on there. And then in December, all these guys think the Americans are coming. MacArthur's coming. And that's the thing. They never say the Americans. They say MacArthur. And because all these bombings are hit them, and they're like, we're not going anywhere. We're going to stay here. And then all of a sudden they stop. And then December 12th, it comes down. Everybody left at Bilibid is out. And only the 800 cases that can't move there. People that are, incapacitated and whatnot. And they all get brought down to the docks on December 13th and it's about 1619. Those British and Dutch guys, they had been on another hell ship that had all these problems and got put in Manila, and they pulled them off there and put them on the Oryoku Maru. So it'll be the last ship to, except for the others that'll leave from Lingai and Gulf later, but it's the last big one to leave. And it's going to go on, it's supposed to be in this convoy, the Mata 37, but it's just going to get destroyed.
Yeah. Now, can you share any firsthand accounts of some of these POWs?
Well, it's a nightmare, and beyond what I can describe. If you want to read about it, there's plenty of books. I'll just say about the loading, and this is what everybody talks about. They get there, all the Japanese load, and then it's their turn to load, and they got to go 3 decks down into this hold. And about 2/3 of these guys are all the officers. They're all left from the campaign. They had taken the senior officers out, but this is like Lieutenant Colonel Beecher from the Marines, who ran Cabanatuan, and all these doctors that have run Bilibid and everything. They're all senior commanders, and the Japanese put them in first. And they're going to put about, they say 600 to 700 in the front hold. They're going to have 700 to 800 in the rear hold. There's a middle hold, about 200. Commander Ports, who kind of runs the whole, he's nominally in charge of everybody. He'll take the rear, Beecher in the middle, and in the front, and then this guy, Maurice Jesus, is in the middle, and they won't be so much. But the thing is on the rear end, when they put these officers in, they have these decks that are spaced about 2.5 feet apart. And they put them in there, and it's maybe a place for like 5 people to lie down. No, get in, bring your knees up to your chest, and we're going to pack in everybody. Those guys all start suffocating immediately, because the thing is, you get to that hold and you look down, and all you see is this swirling mass of humanity. And it's about 120 degrees down there, and you hesitate, and then you got the bayonet in your back, and you're going down. And these guys are standing up. They're all looking up, you're looking down, and then you get down there and you think there's no more room. So what the Japanese do is they have this Sergeant Dow, who is on Davao Penal Colony. He goes down there, orders a guard to start prodding people with bayonets. Everybody moves back. And then you pump in 200 more people to fill that space until nobody can move back anymore. And then there's no room to sit, there's no room to lie down, you'll find space, but then, everybody starts going crazy. There's no bathrooms. It's 130 degrees. They're all malnourished. They've all lost 40 pounds or more during the thing. They were starved to death at Bilibid. There's, minimal water that's going to come down there, and that drives them crazy. And that first night, the thing is that this group is run by this Lieutenant Junzaburo Toshino, and the interpreter is this guy Shusuke Wada, who had been down at Mindanao, and everybody knows they call him Running Wada, but it's all on him because he's the main go-between between the prisoners and the Japanese commanders, and any pleas fall on deaf ears. When they start going out into the bay, everybody goes nuts. They start moaning, and Wada's like, we're closing the hatches because you're frightening all the Japanese passengers. They close the hatches, then it's dark, then everybody starts dying, and they'll have 50 people die from suffocation and murder that first night. It's and it's only going to get 1,000 times worse.
I've always wondered too, I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but how the Japanese civilians on board felt, or what they were thinking of. Obviously it was kind of disturbing for them to be hearing this, but I just wonder how they actually felt about it. But different time, difficult time. So things get worse. So December 15th, near Subic Bay. Tell us about this.
Well, even the next day, the 14th, it gets worse, because as they try to climb up that west coast of Luzon, airplanes have been tipped off. The Ultra has said there's a convoy leaving, and the pilots don't know it, but it's like go up and search Manila Bay and right there, and pilots from the USS Hornet as well as the Hancock find it, and they just start strafing it, and they kill if not hundreds, at least 1,000 of those Japanese on the top. And then the blood starts dripping through the decks. They bring these, doctors up from the Americans and make them start working on on everybody there. Now the Japanese blame all the prisoners because your Americans are shooting us up. They wipe out the guidance of the ship, and it goes into Subic Bay, which is right up on top of Bataan, and that's where it's going to flounder. And that night, again, they lock everybody down in those holds, and it's worse than the first
the night before.
And that's when the vampires come out. And that's the people who are so thirsty, they're going to cut your throat and drink your blood. And they offload all the Japanese that night, but they don't let the Americans off. They don't tell them really what's going on, And then the next morning, then the planes come back. And all the Japanese are off, but then they start bombing the ship. And one bomb hits the bottom aft hold area, and that's what, breaks the ship up. And then the Japanese, guys are on deck spilling out, trying to get away from this bomb hold. There's about 300 killed back there, and then you've got the 50 that and more that had died the previous 2 nights from just suffocation and everything else. 2 guys, they get in the water, they start swimming for the Alangapo base there, and the Japanese will set up machine guns to corral them to come up on one place. 2 guys will escape, George Petritz and Darnell Kadoff. Petritz said he sat because he knew the sun was right behind him, and he sat and waited. Now the Japanese behind this box, and the Japanese were shooting at all the debris in there, knowing that guys were behind, but they don't hit his, and he and Kadoff will escape this mess. But then they all, they all swim for the shore, and that's where there's only about 1,300 of them left.
Mm-hmm. Now, at this time, it was possible to mark hospitals or, say, POW camps or transports in a way that would provide some sort of indication that was not a legitimate military target. Why don't the Japanese do that?
Well, it's Bushido code. It's the what you think of surrendered people. It's the coward's way out. And they never do, and they never really explain it.
Or is it
either.
Because it was carrying soldiers? Was it carrying other?
Well, it was
equipment?
And that's like when I talked about Ultra before, knowing not only are they sending these prisoners, but they're sending them on tons and tons of bauxite, which makes airplanes. Bauxite makes aluminum.
Okay.
And so they're looking at it. We got to end the war faster, and if we don't wipe out this ship, it's going to have that. The thing about it though is once those guys get ashore, their nightmare journey is not even really begun.
Right.
1,300 get put on that tennis court for 6 days. None of them have any clothes. They're all getting burned. There's no water. There's no food there. They're trying to figure out who's dead. Then they take them to these prisons or a jail cell in a movie theater in San Fernando, and they'll leave from there on Christmas and go up to San Fernando up on Lingayen Gulf, and then they'll get on 2 other hell ships, and one of those is going to be bombed. And then they throw them on, then they have nothing, no clothes at all. They're all starved. They've all been worked to death trying to, save all these people from the Oryoku Maru and then the Anora Maru after that. And by the time they get to Japan, you're only going to have 450 of the 1,600 left. And out of that, another 150 will die in those camps. So, out of this whole thing, you'll have about 300, that will survive this ordeal.
Mm. Now, in the war crimes trials after the war, are any Japanese officers or members of the Oryoku Maru's crew charged with any class of war crime?
Of them. All those guys that had been in charge of the prisoners, Toshino, Wada. There was a Japanese Sergeant Aihara. And there was a Aihara at Cabanatuan that they called air raid, because he would always come up behind you, and his thing was to knock your hat off without hitting your head, but he didn't care if it hit your head, so he was knocking people unconscious all the time. And I always thought it was him, but it was a different Aihara, because this air raid guy went earlier. But they all get charged because when they left that jail and theater in San Fernando after the tennis court episode, they took 15 of those guys that were the sickest, and everybody thought they were taken back to Bilibid. They were taken to the cemetery, and they were all executed. Aihara, Wada was there, Toshino was there. And so when they have the war crime trials in 47, Toshino's going to get the death sentence, says Aihara. They give Wada 15 years. Everybody thought that Wada should have gotten it more than anybody else.
They all hated him.
They said it was all on him. The big heroes of that journey are those officers that tried to reason with him, that knew him down at Davao, that were trying to get those hatches open, a little bit more water, a little bit more food, and they were going right up to the muzzles of guns. Francis Bridget, amongst them, and he got bombed and wounded in the Oryoku Maru, and he'll die on the Inora Maru. Everybody who's the hero dies. All those guys that save everybody after the Inora Maru got bombed, helping and working, they exhausted themselves, and then they all die on the Brazil. That was the Lieutenant Colonel Beecher, who had run Command 1. His wife said later on in life, people would call him and be like, "I'm a friend of Curtis's," and he'd be like, "Your friend's on the face." He's like, "Oh, my friends are dead." When they got on the Oryoku Maru, Beecher had these 2 aides that had worked with him throughout that fight on Corregidor and throughout Cabanatuan, and they both had hay fever. And within the first 2 hours of getting on the Oryoku Maru, horses had been down there before, and they both die. Within like a couple of hours, down there. So yeah, it's the ultimate nightmare. I think now Brian Dawes wrote a book about the prisoners of the Japanese, and he said that there were about 50,000 carried on these hell ships, and out of that about 10,000 died. But he didn't include all the Indonesian and Indian workers that had been taken to like Ambon, New Guinea, all these other places. And so when you put all them in, it's about 126,000 people that are transported all over the Pacific, to work on all these. And he says it's about 21,000 that die in these ships. In February of 44, the Tongo Maru and the Ryusei Maru were traveling from Batavia, I think, down to Ambon to bring workers down there, these Ramsha, these 6,600 Indonesian workers. And the USS Rasher gets both of them. And 6,600 of these Ramsha and 3,500 Japanese go down, and it's the worst loss of life at sea ever in a single day, because like 10,000 people, go down by these 2 shots that these guys make. There's a guy named Forrest Knox, and he said you had to hate something in order to make it, whether it be a guard, whether it be the war, whether it be something. You had to have something, because once you started feeling sorry for yourself, he was like, they might as well dig a hole for you, because once that happened, you were a goner, and everybody knew it. So.
What are some good accounts that you would recommend if somebody wanted to read more about the hell ships?
There's a lot. Roy Bodine wrote No Place for Kindness, which was what one of the Japanese had said to him when he asked for water. This is war. There's no place for kindness. Greg Michino, he did a great book called Japanese Hell Ships, which is about all of them. And then you've got all these different accounts. The Manny Lawton was on there. Sidney Stewart wrote "Give Us This Day," and it's about the Father Cummings on there. Who was always doing the Lord's Prayer, and he died, saying "Give us this day" on that Oryoku Maru. All these guys' memoirs: Curtis Beecher, David Nash, Petritz, the guy that survived, that got rescued or escaped. They've all got accounts, and we've got them all. The amazing thing though is right after the war, that guy George Weller, he wrote those like 17-part series on it, and it was just ignored in the newspapers. He's like, this is the biggest story, but as they said, we're not the American higher ups came said we're not trying to spread that right now.
We need to move on.
Yeah, or we need them against the Soviets, so to speak. The Japanese. So
do you see that in the occupation, kind of the suppression of some of these
I've heard of
stories?
it. I've heard of people coming out that, because a lot of these guys come out and testify in the war crimes trial, like Austin Montgomery and I think Jack Schwartz, who was the doctor who was taken up, when the Japanese, and Schwartz had to operate and amputate a guy's arm on the tennis court, with like spoons, and it just, these guys were just unbelievable. And so they all go to Japan and testify after the war. But the craziest thing, it was Tojo in his testimony when Hideki Tojo, when they go after the former premier, he said these are conditions that our soldiers put up with all the time. It's just it's too bad that you Westerners,
you're not used to it,
couldn't deal with it. And it's like, well, we're gonna hang you.
Any final thoughts about the hell ships?
Well, I think it's probably the most unknown episode of the Pacific War. But I think it's like you were saying, there's so many islands and spaces that nobody knows, and it just doesn't really ring anything. Like Paris, Brussels.
Right.
With the European thing. The crazy thing is, though, after the war was over, the Australians going through New Guinea, they found like 10,000 people from India. They were just stranded there. They had all been brought there to work, and they got, they all got to be repatriated. And they're, the Japanese are like, oh, okay, you're free now. Where are we gonna go? So it's just, it's a total catastrophic situation that was just war.
Well, thank you, Jim, for sharing all
Merry
that
Christmas.
today. I know. A great topic for
Well,
December.
we're right at 80 years. This was
Right.
this was 80 years ago that this happened. And the crazy thing is the first day the Oryoku Maru gets attacked is the day that the commander on Palawan executes all his prisoners. It's just it's a nightmare all the way around.
But it is an important story that people should not forget, and it's one of the stories that at the MacArthur Memorial we're very committed to preserving and presenting. So, well, thank you all for joining us. I think we'll be back sometime next year.
Sometime.
Thanks.